Ambiguous is a difficult word. It's really hard, really difficult word to kind of pin down. It's like nailing jello to the wall, as a friend of mine said the other day. That uncertainty is really difficult for us. It's not something that we are really comfortable with as human beings. And so you start feeling that sense of ambiguity, that sense of uncertainty, and things get that difficultness within us, that anxiety gets ramped up there, and we feel really, really challenged. Many griefs have ambiguous elements to them, and some losses cast us into an unknown and really uncomfortable ground that is called ambiguous. And just like the word, it's really kind of hard to pin down. And so is the grief that we experience when we are caught up in that situation. Tonight, we're going to talk about ambiguity and ambiguous losses. My name is Dr. Galen Gobin, and you're joining us here on Journeys Through Grief, and we're really glad to have you here this evening. We invite you to, as usual, post your person's name, the person whose loss brought you here tonight to be with us, or the loss that you have suffered that has brought you here to learn about this, to understand a little bit more, and to kind of figure out how to address this, how to manage it, how to go forward in and through it, because it's a really challenging experience for us. So what is ambiguous loss? That's a loss that you sustained that remains unclear and without resolution. Or this is the kind of the textbook definition, if you will, that Dr. Pauline Boss, who is the person who coined this term, kind of came up with. It means that the loss is kind of, it's amorphous. It doesn't seem to move itself forward. You can't quite put your hands on it and really get it and understand it the way that that most grief really does have an element to it. I like the word that she uses here too, the word sustained, because to think of that word as sustained, this is a loss you've sustained, takes it out of a sense of, instead of it happening to you, takes it away from the sense of something outside imposing itself on you. You've got that, you've experienced that and everything, but this is something that is a part of your life, and troublesome and very difficult. But I think of it, at least when we sustained a loss, that it's a little bit less malevolent behind that. And sometimes to change our language like that and our thinking can help us feel a little bit better and get into what needs to be done with addressing an ambiguous loss. So what kinds of things are that? Well, it is, again, a loss that has no official or social verification. Sometimes things that are as powerful and as tangible as a miscarriage can be experienced this way, in part because society doesn't want to deal with it, and they kind of keep their hands off of you and away from you with that. People have reported to me that when they've had a miscarriage, somebody said to them, well, it's not like you had a baby to lose, or the baby didn't live, so you're really not a mother or father. Those are terrible things to say, and they completely invalidate what your experience is. And so you don't have that social verification, as Dr. Boss talks about. Maybe another example is like having an ex-spouse who dies. Again, people have reported to me that others have said, well, you divorced him in the first place and to be done with him. Why is this bothering you now? you still have a life with that person. You still have memories. You still have an experience with that. And grief is still going to address you in that. But it's not something that society tends to look at and help us with. And therefore, it can feel really, really difficult. Another one may be the death of a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law. Because sometimes that relationship will sever the relationship that you have with the whole of the family. And if there are grandchildren with that extended family, and maybe even the other in-laws, that can be really, really hard. Because you see, the family is still alive, but you've lost the connections, which is one of the two types of ambiguous loss. And these point to those really difficult, challenging losses like that. Again, the in-laws died, the rest of the family is still physically absent from you while still being psychologically present with you. And it's that incongruence, that conflict between the experience of the loss and what your mind and your heart still feels about it. That physical and psychological presence being in conflict with one another. Military families have the same kind of experience sometimes with deployments. Somebody goes out, they go to another part of the world, and they're gone for such a long, long time. And they're physically absent here, and yet they're still with us in some deep ways. And we've not lost them, but we have lost a part of them, and they're not here. And that becomes doubly difficult if, tragically, the service person is killed in their deployment. And especially so if the body is never recovered. These are just examples of this. Other losses to think about that maybe you've experienced are having to care for someone who has a brain difficulty, a brain illness, something like Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's that can come on with that. You know, the person may be sitting across the room from you in a chair, but like my mom did at one point and everything, was reading the newspaper upside down, and I knew that she wasn't there. Similar experiences happen to those people who have an addict in their family. The addict is in the house, but it's not the person that they were connected with. It's not the person that they knew and loved. That the addiction, the experience of that has really changed their personality. Traumatic brain injury. Maybe a person was in a car accident or had another kind of accident, and they had a traumatic brain injury that really affected the way that they were able to live their life. These are all real difficult and real challenging experiences that people have, that are amorphous, that are ambiguous, that are hard to get a hold of, that are hard to really truly understand. Because on the one hand, that person is physically gone, but psychologically present. And on the other, that person is physically here, but psychologically not present. Those are the two types, and it's just really hard. Dr. Boss puts it, it is a loss and it isn't. So we've got this challenge of ambiguity here. Things just don't make sense. We're stuck in this whole sense of uncertainty. And the loss that we're having, the thing that we're trying to process through and work through and everything, just doesn't really fit in the understanding of our life and how it's supposed to be and how life works and the flow of our life. That's the challenge that we have when the death is of a person by suicide or by homicide, or maybe friendly fire, as in something that happened with a first responder or some of our military personnel, or as I mentioned, with perinatal or prenatal losses. Those things are not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to get shot by your own teammates. Babies are supposed to be born. It happens all the time. Why did this occur here? What did I miss in my person's death or in my person's life that allowed this suicide to happen, allowed them to go ahead with it? What was I missing? And this kind of sense of self-blame with that. Very difficult, very challenging, and very, very real. That's a big part of why I want to talk about this tonight and everything, because those things are pushed off to the side. They are pushed away, and we don't honor ourselves with the kinds of losses and the amount of loss that each of those has for us. So when we're experiencing a loss, an ambiguous loss, it amps up our anxiety. That's the primary experience. It's really, as Dr. Boss talks about, it's a stress experience. Grief normally is as well, but this one is just even more specific with that and more difficult with that. What is the definition of anxiety? Well, I looked it up. It is distress or uneasiness of mind caused by fear or danger or misfortune. That certainly seems to feel right. It is an earnest but tense desire. There's an eagerness, which really makes some sense to me with this, that desire that we have to be reconnected with our person, and it doesn't know how we're supposed to do that. And there's a real eagerness, a longing to get into that. Anxiety is also a state of apprehension and psychic tension. And it's just gripping us, gripping our heart, gripping our minds. It makes it very, very difficult. Disquiet, apprehension, unease, maybe a restlessness, an uncertainty. All of these are synonyms for anxiety. And I lift those up and bring those up because if they find resonance within you, if they feel right, if they sort of seem like they're naming something that you haven't been able to get a hold of, then maybe what you're experiencing here is ambiguous loss. It's keeping you from really getting into and dealing with the grief of whatever the loss is. So how do we respond? Ambiguity needs certainty, at least as much as possible. And again, certainty is something that we human beings really long for. We complain, I've said this before, we complain about the rut of life, but yet we like it because we know what's going on. We know what, to expect on our way to work or our way to the grocery store or things. And we don't have to think too much about it. We like that certainty because it helps us to feel in control in a world that really is chaotic and has a lot of randomness with it. But we can't fix that which we have lost. So we can't get the certainty that we're looking for, that we long for and hunger for. The only thing that would make life certain again is to have that person come back, to have that situation that we find ourselves in to be gone, to reconnect with the family, or to have had the baby and not have lost it. And that is an impossibility. So how do we find some certainty so that we can have some kind of way to cope with this and manage this and keep ourselves together? Well, let me give you a few thoughts. One of them is really very, very simple and very powerful. And that's just simply listing your losses. So take a piece of paper, take a pen, sit down at your computer and your keyboard and make a list. And include all of those things that you're experiencing. Now, of course, the great loss may be that that person is away from you on a deployment, 6 months away or whatever, or on in a job in another country. Maybe that's what you're experiencing. But there are a lot of pieces that get lost with that. So make the list and include all of them. Maybe that physical absence means that you're missing their touch or missing the sound of their voice or their movement in the house. And the lack of that creates a sense of loneliness. Maybe if that person isn't in your home, you're missing the individual chores that you would get help with. It's a lot of work to keep a house together, pay the bills, keep it clean, to prepare the meals, to clean up after the meals, to do the laundry. And if all of that suddenly falls on a single person where before there's been two or maybe others, that's something that you've lost. Maybe that person was somebody you just felt comfortable confiding in and talking to and sharing things with. Whatever it may be, write them down and write down the individual pieces within that. Write down the individual things with that. Because that's how you begin to know how many things are impacted here and what the losses actually are. And don't do it and then be done with it. Keep a running list, because you're not going to sit down once and get every part of that together. There's going to be pieces to it that come up later. Get out your pencil and paper again and write it down. Go to the computer and type it out. If you're on the computer, print it up. Hold it. Look at it. Because to have that in your hands makes something a little bit more tangible. And now those losses are not just this sort of amorphous thing out there and beyond, but you have them in your hands and you can see them. That piece of paper makes them a little more real and gives you a sense of, okay, I recognize that. And that becomes very, very helpful. That gives you a sense of control over what that is that you're missing. Okay, that's one thing. Now, another thing that I want to invite you to, and this is a little bit more difficult to do. This takes a lot of practice. But ambiguity invites you into a different kind of thinking. Most of the time, and it's kind of the way our brains are set up and things, we have what's called either or thinking. Somebody is either here or they're not. You know, somebody's either present or they're not. It's either black or white. And that's just kind of the way our brains work with categorizing things and sort of understanding things, which is exactly why an ambiguous loss, where someone is present but because of their illness is not, or is psychologically present with us but physically not. That's where we start to get that conflict going on. There's a sense of discontinuity with that because we're expecting them to either be here or not. So this different kind of thinking that I want to suggest to you is what's called both and thinking. And I go back to what Dr. Boss said about an ambiguous loss. It is both a loss and it isn't. And she uses the word and in there. It's a very powerful word. So we need to adjust our thinking and to give space for both the absence and the presence that is real. Because when that person has dementia, when that person is an addict, when that person has a traumatic brain injury or is suffering depression or something like that, they are physically present, but they are not here. They are there and there also with us in our presence as well as in our mind. It's just a really weird kind of thing. So both of those become true. The word "and" includes both. They are both here and they are not. Now that takes practice. It takes practice to give yourself the space, and we're used to doing it the other ways. I just misspoke and did earlier when I said, but they're not here, because they are. They are here and they are not psychologically here. So you have to take some practice, and you have to forgive yourself when you find yourself full of frustration and things, and just dealing with the anxiety and the uncomfortableness that is often there. What that both and thinking and using that word "and" will do will increase your tolerance for ambiguity. And what that does, when you begin to feel a little bit more comfortable with the fact that something is one and the other, it helps to reduce the anxiety. It takes some time. I won't fib to you. It takes some time to figure that out and to work with that. But the more comfortable you get with that, the more comfortable you get with that kind of thinking, and the more comfortable you get then with the ambiguity, it lowers your anxiety over the uncertainty. Now, another skill is to try to find what you are in control of. And that can be really hard, especially again when you're thinking about somebody with dementia, or again an addict, with a person who's addicted, or in a clinical depression situation. You got to create some space for yourself and for your needs. Maybe, and that's in a schedule. Again, we like things certain. That's one of the things we like about the clock and calendars. So create time within your day, within the calendar, by setting boundaries wherever that may be possible. Most of this is going to be with your own self and your own thinking. How can I do this? I've got to care for this person. I need to be aware of what they're doing. I need to keep watch and keep vigilant and make sure that they're going to be okay. But you're a limited person. You only have so much time. You only have so much energy, only so much attention. And to be able to give yourself some space within that, some breathing room, where you can renew your own self. You've got to have sleep. You've got to have rest. And those kinds of things can be very, very helpful for you. Because once again, when you get caught up in that kind of hamster wheel of things just running and running and running, and then you step off, we can feel guilty, but it allows us a sense then to enter into some forgiveness for ourselves. And that sense of forgiveness for ourselves, the sense of both and thinking, the space of or the awareness to give our own self time and space for ourselves, to renew and to be build up in our own resilience, to be able to respond to the upcoming needs, really helps a lot. And then the final thing that I want to bring up is to have you consider rituals. Our lives are full of rituals, and we have a video here on Journeys Through Grief about rituals. Look it up. I'll go into more detail there, but create the rituals that will help you address the ambiguity, that sense of unknown and uncertainty. Let me give you an example. a woman's husband died, and one of the things that she was really missing and found herself feeling really experiencing a sense of loneliness about, and she discovered that was without him being in the house, was being able to come home from work and having anybody to talk to. So what she told me about and what she came home and started doing was to walk in the door and light a candle that represented her husband. And she would share her day. She walked around the house, prepared her meals, stuff. She would talk to the candle. Represented his he was present in her mind and stuff, but this gave her something tangible, something physical in the house that represented him, so that she would have a connection. And she would keep that candle burning through her evening. And before she went to bed at night, she said her good nights to it and then extinguished the candle. And that really helped her. That was something that just developed out of her own heart and her own mind and her own needs that she had. And so I invite you to find those kinds of rituals. Sit quietly for a bit. Think about what you do. The rituals will come to you because they're things that we normally do, and we'll be able to develop them. So be creative and seek out the assistance of others who've traveled this space before you. Find a bereavement group, get involved with online chats or message boards. I know that Instagram has a very large community of people who have experienced perinatal loss or prenatal loss. And those can be wonderful places to find the support, break down the loneliness, get ideas for other rituals that other people have done or things that other people have discovered in their own experience of this, for trying to understand the both and the and. Now, you'll find also really good support here at Journeys Through Grief. And so we welcome you and invite you to like us, follow us, and be with us as we walk this journey of grief together. Share our page with your friends and your family. And while you're there, post your comments about this experience tonight. Post your questions. That's where we get some great ideas about what we're going to talk about and what we can bring and support you in the best way possible. So we'll look at those. We'll get back to those. We will answer those. We will comment on them. And together as a community here at Journeys Through Grief, there's a lot of support and a lot of people that can encourage you as you seek your way along. I want to offer my thanks to Jessica again for monitoring the questions and comments, and for all her support that this Journeys Through Grief here we wouldn't have without her knowledge and the work that she does behind the scenes. So thanks a lot, Jess. Appreciate it. And I'm Dr. Galen Gobin, and it's my pleasure to be with you in this time. And I send you grief, or send you peace as you grieve your loss.